Okay. This is Jeff Greene's interview with the Palm Beach Post. He is a candidate, Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate. Welcome to the Palm Beach Post, Mr. Greene.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Why don't you start by telling everybody just how you made all that money in a way that the listeners and the readers of the newspaper can understand?
Sure. Well, look, I can tell you this, it's interesting coming to the Palm Beach Post and how I almost get a chill through me because my life actually, may sound silly, but in a way turned around from the Palm Beach Post. I was in 1973, I was here in West Palm Beach with my parents, and I was working as a busboy at the Breakers Hotel. And was trying to pay my way back through Johns Hopkins the second year, and I was having it was a tough challenge because I didn't have the same first-year scholarships year two. Not making any tips, opened up the Palm Beach Post, saw a classified ad for telephone sales, and it was to sell circus tickets over the phone. Right, it was called the Pan American Bank Building. I think it was on South Olive, and I went over there, did a great job selling tickets. Turned into a job business in which I was able to not only pay my way through college, but after I graduated, I was on the road, sort of living out of my car. I had a Pontiac with a bar across the back seat with all my clothes in it, and I'd bring them into the local Motel 6 a days in, and I spent 3 years of my life after I graduated Johns Hopkins, where I worked my way through. I spent almost 3 years going from town to town, Bluefield, West Virginia, Mount Airy, North Carolina, Dubuque, Iowa, 2 weeks here, 2 weeks there. And I was able to save up $100,000 in the 70s, which that would be like somebody saving up probably, I don't know, $500,000 today.
Probably.
And when I finished college, I wasn't even 20 years old, so I was doing this, and it was lonely. I was out in these little towns, but I saved up $100,000, went back to Harvard Business School to get my MBA. So when I went to back to Harvard Business School, I needed to get a place to live. So a guy who was at college with said, Jeff, you should think about buying a house. So I bought a 3-decker. It's $37,000, $7,000 down. The plan was just I'll live in it for 2 years, sell it when I'm done. Worked out well. By the time I was done at Harvard Business School, I owned 18 properties, and the values just skyrocketed. And suddenly, my $100,000, I had $1 million net worth before I was 25 years old. And then it was my career. So then the next, I was in different businesses over the years, but I just kept in several cycles. I managed to accumulate by 2004, 2005, I had $1 billion real estate portfolio. I had lots of debt on it. And, my net worth was was probably over $700 million. And how I made that money? I made that money like when I was doing the circus ticket sales. 16-hour days. I work from when I wake up in the morning till when I go to bed at night, and I always saved a lot of money. And then, what's gotten a lot of attention in this race is in 2006, like a lot of people, I saw the real estate market was about to crash, and I was able to come up with some investments in which I was able to buy protection and insurance sort of on a real estate bond, on real estate-oriented bonds, and through that protection I was able to protect the money I'd made and the jobs I'd created.
Can I ask you some questions about those derivatives, about those
Sure.
credit default swaps, which I'm not an expert on, but you obviously are.
I don't know if I'm an expert.
When you bought those, did you actually own the financial instruments on which you were then paid off?
Well, look, you couldn't. Here's the problem. I had $1 billion worth of real estate investments.
Right.
Okay. You can't. I wish I could have bought insurance on those investments. So instead of that, I bought insurance on bonds that were backed by. There were 20 separate pool of 20 bonds.
Right, but you didn't actually own the bonds.
No, I owned real estate that I was trying to protect, so that's what I was doing. But I think that it would have. It's kind of like, look, if say that somebody wants to get hurricane insurance on their house in Palm Beach, and they say, well, you can't, but you can buy insurance on a basket of homes in Palm Beach. If there's a hurricane, you'll still get paid. I would say that's pretty good for them, and that's what I did. And I'll tell you, if I hadn't have done it, I'd be in big trouble today.
On your website, you portray this like you were just trying to protect your investments that you had made.
Absolutely.
But this insurance, this derivative stuff you bought, was not actually on your specific investments. It was on something else.
But it very much related to my investments. I had real estate investments, and I bought a derivative that related to bonds that are backed by real estate investments. It's an absolute correlation.
And when somebody paid you, it was banks who paid you?
Yeah, well, it was the biggest banks in Wall Street.
Right, so money that we paid to bail out those banks was funneled through those banks to pay off the obligations they owed you.
I don't know if that's really the case. So first of all, the banks that I did business with, which I don't really feel like disclosing because it's not, there's no reason I should, but I can tell you.
Why shouldn't we know whether some of the banks that we bailed out then contributed to your billion-dollar fortune?
Okay, first of all, my fortune I made before I got involved in the credit. I wasn't a Wall Street person. I'm a real estate person. So I was doing this to protect the investments I made, the jobs I'd created, and that's what I did. And had I not done it, I would have been in big trouble. So I'm glad that I was able to do it, and I wish that every Florida homeowner had been able to buy insurance on their own home value. But unfortunately, it's not available.
In a lot of cases, these derivatives paid off more than the person actually had invested. In other words, the amount of money that they paid was that they got back was like a jackpot, considering the bet that they had made and the resources they had risked. How much did you get paid in comparison to how much you had risked on the bonds that you insured?
Oh, I wasn't insuring bonds. I was buying insurance.
Yes, you were buying insurance that you had bought insurance for.
So I was buying insurance.
What was your derivative payoff? That's what I'm trying to get.
No, I don't even have the exact amount. I mean, because it came in stages over a number of years. But I can tell you this: I was at risk for hundreds of millions of dollars, and I ended up making hundreds of millions of dollars. And I can tell you this: when I first did the investment, I was down on my investment, and my property values were down, and my business was going poorly. And lucky for me that the part that turned around was the protection that I bought for my investments. The part that didn't turn around is my real estate business, which is still struggling today. But,
I don't understand how you can say you weren't a Wall Street guy when what you were doing is buying very complicated financial instruments from big banks on Wall Street, which then paid you off, probably using funds that taxpayers gave to those banks. How are you not a beneficiary?
It's ridiculous. I'm not a Wall Street. I've never even been to Wall Street. I'm not.
Well, you have some of their money, though.
I'm not someone. I'm not. That's like someone who buys insurance in the house and gets payments saying that they're in the insurance industry. I went up against the biggest banks on Wall Street. They didn't even want to do these trades with me. They didn't even want to let me protect my investments. I'm glad I did it. I saw the housing market plummeting, and I did what I had to do to protect my investments and the jobs of the people that worked for me and the mouths that I fed. And I can tell you this: compared to the people who were in Congress, like Kendrick Meek, who was accepting Fannie Mae donations, Freddie Mac donations, and anybody can Google this and see, he was having subprime housing market seminars in which he would invite people in the community to come in, and it said in the flyer, even if you have no down payment, bad credit, no down payment, and no proof of income, we'll help you get a loan and buy a house. Well, you know what? So to me, that's what caused the housing crisis. What caused the housing crisis was Congress not regulating the banks and allowing them to make these kinds of crazy loans, teaser rate loans, that they knew or should have known the borrowers would have no ability to pay back. This wasn't somebody like me trying to get protection on my investments.
Yeah, but the investments that you made a fortune in also were completely unregulated, right?
They are. The derivatives are unregulated, and I think they should be regulated. I'm in favor of the regulations.
Would they, if the regulations that you want to be in place were put in place, would you still have been able to make the investments that you made in derivatives?
Yes.
Or would they have stopped
yes.
you?
No. The problem with derivatives is that there's no look. There's two problems that I see with this whole housing Wall Street situation. Number one was what I just mentioned, which is that banks can't give loans, shouldn't give loans, or lending institutions shouldn't give loans to borrowers without making sure the borrowers can pay back the loans. I mean, when I bought my first property in Somerville outside of Cambridge, I had to bring in my tax returns, show my proof of income, show I had good credit. That's why I got a loan. And the problem is they shouldn't be, that was unregulated. The second thing on the derivatives thing is that a derivative or a credit default swap is just a contract. It's a contract between J.P. Morgan or Credit Suisse or an individual or a hedge fund or institution. The problem is no one knows how many contracts these guys are writing, and there's no collateral. There was no collateral for the contracts. So when I did my contracts, which I did in good faith, I never was trading credit default swaps. I did this just to protect my investments. That's the only reason I did it. I never did it before, and I never did it after. And when I did these credit default swap investments, they were looking at me and thinking, what if it goes wrong? How can Jeff Greene pay us back? And they were concerned. And then by the time I was ready, the market started collapsing, I was worried whether they'd be able to pay me. So the problem with derivatives is there has to be some type of collateral, because it's an insurance policy, so that the people who are writing the derivatives have the money to pay those that are buying them.
There was no point at which you had to pay anybody back. You were just paying premiums on these, weren't you?
No, absolutely not. I was shorting bonds. If they went the wrong way, I would have had to pay for 30 years. This was not, this could have been hundreds of, I took a very big risk.
Would you have been able to pay?
It would have been a struggle. I took a
So what's
risk.
the difference between them giving you that opportunity and a bank giving somebody a loan that they can't pay back? You were involved in a contract that
Okay.
you say you couldn't
No, first
have
of all,
paid
I
back.
was required to put up a deposit for 5 years' worth of premiums. So they estimated that based on their historical data, that they would have enough collateral that nothing would go wrong. But I'm just saying that the problem for the most part was people like Lehman Brothers and AIG, companies like that, were just writing unlimited amounts of insurance policies. It would just like be a hurricane insurer.
You're describing to me a contract in which you weren't sure you could pay, they weren't sure they would pay,
Well,
and yet the reforms that you advocate would still allow that to happen.
No. First of all, I'm saying that both sides have to be paid. Derivatives should be on some kind of an exchange, and both sides, there absolutely should be requirements that and regulations so both sides know that the other side can pay if something goes wrong.
Since you have made all the money, what have you done with it that might help some of the people who lost their shirts in all of this? Have you done anything with the money to benefit the people who are really suffering from the recession?
Well, my wife and I are very charitable. I grew up in Massachusetts, and I grew up my whole life trying. That's why I'm running for the United States Senate, because I'm panicked about the way the world's going today. I'm panicked about the physical security that we feel you don't have in environmental security, economic security, social security, and how our elected officials are failing us in all those areas. We have a foundation that's an 8-figure foundation. We've supported dozens of charities just here in Florida, and I've been charitable my whole life, and I'm delighted that I'm able to at this point in my life even be more charitable.
One just follow up. Where did you get the idea to do it? The book said that you talked with Paulson.
Yeah, I think that what happened was this. It was 2006. I don't know if you're aware of this. My dad had been a textile machinery dealer in New England, and when the mills all closed, he lost his livelihood. That's how my mom and dad came to West Palm Beach in 1970. He actually came a couple of years earlier, and then I almost lost everything I'd made in the early 90s during the real estate crash. So when I saw the market getting rough again, and I could see that things were out of whack in 2004, 2005, I got concerned. So in 2006, I called up really everyone I knew on Wall Street. I mean, investment bankers with whom I'd done business and friends from Harvard Business School. And one guy I knew, John Paulson, had a hedge fund, and he told me that he was doing this. He was doing these subprime mortgage-backed bond securities, and he tried to explain it to me and showed me 30 pages of stuff in his office. And so he kind of suggested that this protection was available.
And just one last point on this. You have repeatedly said that you, quote, took on Wall Street. To most people, taking on Wall Street means going up and stopping people from making obscene profits or illegal profits or whatever. What do you mean by taking on Wall Street, since, again, you seem to benefit from your access to people on Wall Street more than you took it on?
No. I mean, look, when John Paulson told me about this, he said, look, I'm starting a fund really to be for people to speculate. I said, look, I'm looking for something to protect my investments. And so I went to the Wall Street banks, and they said, most of them said, no, this isn't for individuals like you. You're out of luck. You're just going to have to ride the market. And which way, if it goes down, that's going to be your too bad. And I pushed and pushed and pushed, and I got them to agree to let me do these, to let me buy this protection. And in the end, it was me against them. I mean, my gain would have, if I lost money, I would have written a big check to the investment banks on Wall Street. And let me tell you, some of those CEOs would have probably had bigger bonuses. And but in the end, I went up against them, and they wrote out checks to me, and I protected my investments that I'd worked hard for all my life.
Just so I understand, let's suppose all these people with these crazy mortgages had somehow been able to pay them, and not been foreclosed. What would have happened to the money you put at risk? You said you would have continued.
I was buying insurance on 30-year bonds, so I would have
Right.
had to continue to write. If everyone keep paying, I would have had to continue to write checks, and I believe it was somewhere around $12 million a year for 30 years. Because I would have, but you know, the reality is that's not possible because people die and they move from homes, you know, so loans do get paid off even in a good housing market. So, but in a worst case, if every single loan stayed in place, that's what I would have had to do.
That basically was premiums for the insurance for 30 years.
That's premium. It was a big, bold risk, and I got to tell you, that's why not many people did it. Wasn't like I was such a genius. I took on a real risk. Made a calculated risk that I took on to protect my investments, and I could have had a big loss. You know, it's not a. You know, lucky for me, it turned into a big gain. But I didn't go into it I never went into it as a speculation or trying to be involved in Wall
Just
Street.
one more detail then. But if the bonds had matured for 30 years, you then would have been paid. I mean, they would have paid off, right?
I was paying insurance premium. I would have had to keep paying insurance premium for 30
right,
years.
because you didn't actually own the bonds.
No,
so they never would have paid you anything.
No,
You were at risk because you did not actually own the bonds.
No, it's just like
they never would have paid you.
No, it's like if you own a house and you may have to pay insurance. You have to keep paying every year. If there's a loss and the house burns down, you get paid. If there's no loss, you just keep paying the premiums.
This would be like me buying insurance on your mansion and betting that your mansion gets knocked down. And if it does, I get paid off, even though I never owned your mansion. I never lived in it.
I don't really see
never risked
that.
that much money.
I don't
just
see it that
risked
way.
the insurance premium. Isn't that really the way it worked?
No, that's not how it works.
How is that wrong?
Because this is a pool of 20 bonds that's made up of 10,000 loans. It's an index. It's not on anybody's mansion. It's an index. So it's like the S&P 500. I mean, you can't. It's very different. It's an index which is representative of what happens in a market. It's like somebody buying the S&P 500. So you know, it's not like so you can't say if somebody buys a put on the S&P 500 that they're hoping that one of the companies fails, because it was a very broad index that represents 10,000
But
loans.
if the real estate bubble had not burst, would you have been worse off?
Not necessarily, because my holdings would have done better. You know, I had a very big portfolio of real estate, and it is much. I mean, I can tell you, I still own a big portfolio of real estate, and we have rents are down 30%. We have retail stores sitting empty. Vacancy rates, 20% in some cases. It's a struggle, and I can tell you that that if the market was good, I would have lost money on this, but I would have done better. It was really a protection hedge. I mean, people can say whatever they want, but that's what it was.
Sounds like you were going to make out either way pretty well.
Well, not really. I mean, I think that I didn't make out either way because I've lost a lot of money on my real estate investment.
Can you, just for the sake of people listening and who are going to read this, so when is it coming back?
Real estate market?
Yes, when is it going
Well, I think, look, this is one of the reasons I'm running for the United States Senate because, we have Kendrick Meek, against who I'm running this primary, came out and said that we created 151,000 jobs in Florida in May. I mean, to me, this is a guy who's been in the Congress for almost 8 years. We created 41,000 jobs in the whole country in the private sector in May. And I think we have to be honest with the people of America and ourselves and realize that we're not creating jobs, we're not solving these problems, and we have to get some bold moves in Washington to get the economy going.
All right, give us an example of one or two of bold moves that you would support if you're elected.
Well, okay, first of all, the job creation is number one, number two, and number three. And everyone's talking about it. How are we going to do it? Number one, we have to be much more targeted on small businesses in America. We need to do tax incentives for the businesses to grow, payroll tax holiday for a business that increases their payroll by a certain amount. I was at one of the programs in Broward County a couple of weeks ago where it's a government program where if you hire someone who's receiving assistance, the government will pay 95% of their wages for, I think, up to 3 months. Gives companies incentives to hire people, and provided the companies just make a good faith representation that they're going to continue to keep those people working. So really it costs us as taxpayers very little because instead of giving people assistance, you're giving them a job. And and then of course they have money they're spending, and hopefully it gets the economy moving. I think in the area of green technology, we need to be much more aggressive. I mean, this whole oil spill thing, I think...
Give us an example of how you would be more aggressive,
well,
particularly as it might relate to Florida.
Okay, well, look, Florida is... Number one, we have the sunshine here, so we should really do more in solar technology. I mean, I talked to my friends at MIT, and they're telling me that they're working on a solar solar energy device that's maybe 2 feet by 2 feet. And if they can get that to work, it'll heat an entire house, heat all the hot water and the house itself. So as this tech, we need to make sure, and as the federal government level, we need to invest much more money in research and development in green technology. Right now, this year we're spending $4 billion on green technology, but on research and development. You know that we're sending out. We're spending on foreign oil at $80 a barrel, $350 billion a year, and a lot of that money is going to countries that are not our friends. So to spend only $4 billion on research and development to solve the problem, this is the failure of the representatives in Washington. We need to wrap that up. We need research and development on solar technology, biofuels. Ethanol has been basically a failure. You know, it pollutes. It's not efficient.
Corn-based ethanol.
Corn-based ethanol. We need to algae. I've been reading some studies on algae. My understanding is that you can get as much as 10,000 gallons per acre per year from algae if you can figure out how to grow it, harvest it, and so we can use it for fuel. So this is something that would be great in Florida because our land works very well for algae. Other things, you know, the Gulf Stream. I mean, everyone knows, most scientists believe that if we could somehow harness the wave technology, we could use that to provide a lot of renewable energy. We need to spend more money on research and development. If we can do it, it'll be right here. You know, that we need to develop it, design it, and then build it here in Florida. Other things we could be doing: buses and delivery vehicles are natural to run on natural gas. Why are they still driving on using diesel and petroleum-based products? You know, cars should be electric cars. So we need to get to that point.
Well, electric cars, by even the most green conscious researchers, are 20, 25 years off.
Well, you know, let me tell you something. To me, that's exactly, again, it's another failure of Kendrick Meek and these career politicians who have been in Washington, because we put a man on the moon over 40 years ago. No one in this room can tell me that we couldn't have, as a country, have now come up with a car that runs on a battery. And I know why we haven't, because these oil companies are dictating our energy policy. You know, that's what they're doing. They're basically writing it. They're producing it, and as a result, we're still driving around it. We haven't invented an electric car yet. And I'll tell you this: everyone's talking about a moratorium in the Gulf on drilling. Another moratorium we need is a moratorium on oil companies giving contributions to politicians. I'd like to see every oil company, every politician in Washington make a pledge that they're not going to take a penny from any oil company for the next 10 years. So their oil policy will start to be written for the people of Florida and the people of America.
Probably be an easier pledge for someone like you to keep, right?
Well, you know what? I think it's a pledge. I think everyone in America is so angry about what's going on in the Gulf and this BP thing that, you know what? If I'm in Washington, you can be sure that's the kind of thing I'll be pounding the table and pushing for, because it's not about how can we look at this failed energy policy? It's time we get these oil companies. You know, Charlie Crist, Marco Rubio, and Kendrick Meek have all taken money from these oil companies.
Kendrick Meek has taken money from you too, hasn't he?
Well, yeah. He hasn't given it back.
Uh-oh.
You said that if you're elected, that you're going to make sure that not one penny of seniors don't lose one penny of coverage because of health care reform. Does that mean you're opposed to the getting rid of the Medicare Advantage subsidies?
Which part of the American? I don't know what they are exactly.
It's part of the Medicare program, the subsidies that the government pays to insurance companies to give benefits to seniors, extra benefits to seniors.
No, I don't want to cut one penny of benefits to seniors. I mean, Social Security, Marco Rubio wants to raise the age. I don't want to raise the age. It's an insurance policy that, as far as I'm concerned, people in America, they pay the money in, they pay the premiums in, they deserve to retire and get that money at ages 66, 67, or whatever is in the charts right now, the ages that we now have. They don't need to do that. And I think that the good news is, you know, Senator Alan Simpson and Chief of Staff, former Chief of Staff Erskine Bowles, are going to come out with a deficit commission study in December. And I hope I'm in Washington on January 3rd to start reading it.
And the chances are they're going to say that one of the big problem areas, if not the big problem area, is Medicare. And one of the aspects of Medicare spending that most people say is needless are these Medicare Advantage subsidies. Are you saying you don't know much about Medicare Advantage?
I think that Medicare has to be protected. Look, my mother's...
Do you know the difference between Medicare and Medicare Advantage?
Why don't you ask to explain it to me, and then I'll know it.
Well, for somebody who's running for the Senate, that's a bit of a jolt, but Medicare Advantage was set up as basically a private Medicare option, I think maybe 10 years ago, perhaps longer. And then when the prescription drug plan was passed in 2003, a lot of subsidies were given to drug companies and to insurers to push people into these private Medicare Advantage plans. They have, what is the figure, I believe, 12 to 13?
14%. It costs 14% more to pay for the plans that these people in Medicare Advantage get than regular Medicare.
Look, I tell you this.
It's considered wasteful by most people who aren't working for a senior group.
The reality, everyone here knows, I got into this race 7 weeks ago. I'm up to date on most of the issues, and I can tell you this, I spent a lot of time with my mother who lives here and is 83 and a half years old.
Is she on Medicare Advantage?
No, she's not. But no, she's not. Thank God she's not. But I can tell you, all of her friends, when we sit around and they tell me how delighted they are, the donut hole's been closed with the new health plan, and that, you know what, these people, I'm going to Washington. I want to fight to protect the Social Security for the elderly, and I want to make sure that they have adequate medical care, however that comes down. And I'll certainly get familiar with those.
What would you do then with Social Security, which is not going to have enough money to pay out the claims, and with Medicare, which is a $45 trillion liability?
Well, first of all, that $45 trillion is not an audited number that came from any commission. It's just somebody's number. I mean, I've read that. That's not an audited number. There's projections that go up. Sorry?
It's from the government.
Well, there are all different numbers I've read about on Medicare and the amounts of the costs. I mean, no one knows what people's life expectancies are. There's all different kinds of projections. But I can tell you that my goal is to protect Medicare, to protect Social Security for all the people of Florida.
You also said that you're going to expand coverage, regulate private insurance companies, and control costs and change the health care bill in ways that you think will benefit people. Can you be specific about what you think needs to be done to tweak the health care law as it stands right now?
Look, when I get to Washington, I'm going to go through that bill. I haven't gone through how many pages is that bill? It's a couple of thousand pages?
Not anymore. The one that finally passed was about 970.
Okay, it's only 970.
Light reading.
Yeah, so I'm glad that the 32 million Americans are now have health care that didn't have before. I'm glad that if somebody has a pre-existing condition, they're not going to be sent home from the hospital now, and they'll be taken care of in America. And I'm glad the donut hole is closed, so elderly people in Florida know that they will have medicine they need. If I will go through that bill line by line. I'm a businessman. This is what I do for a living. Is I understand business. I understand how companies work. When I understand, I will go through this line by line. Well, if there's waste, we'll get rid of the waste. If there's cost savings, there'll be cost savings. I think there's a lot of things we can do in medicine to be more cost effective. I mean, I still go to the doctor, and the doctor still writes out a prescription by hand. I'm sure there can be a lot of technological advances in medicine that will get us cost savings.
So, back to your point of a moment ago, you're sitting around 7 or 8 weeks ago, and something suddenly happens to make you say, I'm going to take some of this money I made and run for the U.S. Senate. Was there one thing? Was there one thing followed by another thing to make you want to do this?
Well, look, I'll tell you this. I've been, like so many people around Florida, around America, I'm fed up and I'm frustrated with what's going on. And, truthfully, I got to be a little panicked with the way things are going in this country. And one thing that happened to me, I got married later in life. I have an 8-month-old baby. And I think that as I look at my little son Malcolm, and I think how I've lived the American dream, I really wonder if he and his kids, other kids his age, will have the same opportunities I had. And so I think that, I look at the government as, in Washington and in Tallahassee, as the provider of security for us. Physical security, our borders and our streets, economic security, making sure we have plenty of jobs and housing, Social Security, not just the payments to elderly people, but, to people when they can't afford to have a disability, and so people have good educations, and so we take care of people in our society. And environmental security, so the beautiful place around us is taken care of. And the people who are in office now, whether it's Kendrick Meek or Charlie Crist, have failed on all 4 of these, F, and F. The world has never felt less safe to me. Iran's on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon. If they do, it'll bring about the greatest nuclear arms race we've ever seen. All those countries, can you only imagine if all these countries in this part of the world, many of whom are so hostile to us, all have nuclear weapons? You know, you've got economic security. We have a 12.3% unemployment rate, or now it's 12% here. Only created 41,000 jobs in the whole country.
11.3.
It went down to that price. But let's celebrate that it's only 11.3%. You know, it's still a failure. We're not creating jobs in this country. Environmental, you know, we're right now witnessing the worst natural disaster in our history probably, and it's right here off our coast. And so when it comes to the social issues, when you talk about Medicare and Social Security, when I talk to elderly people around the state, and I've been around the state almost every day since I got involved with this race, I ask them what's on their mind, and they tell me, I say, what's the number one issue? And they say, jobs. I say, what else? They say, well, a lot of our friends, we wonder if we're going to run out of money someday and we're going to outlive our money and not have enough money to pay for food on our table and for our housing. And so to me, I look at those four things and I'm thinking, like, we can do a lot better as a country, because as bad as everything is, we can do better. Number one, on the economy, I look at the economy as through very rose-colored eyes. I look at it like we're the biggest economy in the world. We have the greatest universities by far. Americans are hardworking. Most Americans, if they have a chance to work a few extra hours on a Saturday, they'd actually go to do it because they'd rather have a little extra money in their pockets. And what we're witnessing in this world today is the biggest transformation of people from poverty to the middle class that we've ever seen in world history. Just in China, in the next 5 years, 370 million people are going to go from poverty to middle class, which means they make $3,000 per capita. With that kind of, the number of people, new consumers that are in this world, we should be celebrating and thinking, how can we sell into these new middle classes, not just China, but Brazil, China, India, name the country. But the problem is, we're in an economic world war where we're fighting against China, India, Korea, that they all want our jobs. And we have to make sure, in Washington, this is one of the reasons I'm running, is I want to make sure that our kids are the best educated, and we have to have the best infrastructure so we can compete in this economic world war and sell our products like we did in previous generations when I was a kid to all these new markets.
You mentioned Iran. If, after a time, the government of the United States decided that sanctions were not going to deter Iran from building a nuclear weapon, and the government believed that there was reasonable support from around the world for it, would you vote to authorize the use of force against Iran?
You know, I'm not going to talk about force and not force. I can tell you this, that my feeling is if this regime in Iran gets a nuclear weapon, it will be it could be the single most destabilizing event in our lifetime. So I am absolutely against it. I think the problem is we do not have crippling sanctions. I'm a Democrat, but I'm an independent Democrat, and I'm going to tell you that I don't agree with the president on this, that I would have been much tougher on Iran. The fact that American companies...
What would you have done?
Crippling sanctions. There are American companies...
Crippling sanctions.
American companies, oil companies, are still providing, through the subsidiaries, products to the oil industry in Iran. Everyone knows that. American banks, through the subsidiaries, are still doing business with Iran. Members of that Iranian regime are still traveling to countries, not to countries that should be part of this these sanctions. So crippling sanctions means we cut them off everywhere we can. The other thing we need to do is we need to stand by our friends, like Israel, which I think we have not stood by as strongly as we could have. Because let's face it, there's only one free democracy in the Middle East on which we as Americans can count. Where we can have our presence in this vital area that's so vital to our economy.
You think the United States should never criticize Israel?
Well, look, I think Israel, it's very simple. Iran, while we're spinning our wheels, the Iranian government's spinning 3,000 centrifuges a day and putting uranium together for a nuclear weapon. So while we're criticizing Israel for building houses in Jerusalem, which is the capital of Israel, you know, we're not criticizing all these other countries.
Israel, of course, has already built its own nuclear weapons.
Well, no one really knows what Israel has. I mean, that's the assumption. I mean, in the world community, I personally haven't seen it.
You seem like a man of the world. Do you doubt that Israel is a nuclear country?
That's the word we've all heard, you know, but that's all the word. But, you know, who knows? We thought that, you know, Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. So, I mean, who knows? I mean, the issue is not whether Israel has nuclear weapons. The issue is that we don't want Iran, which is arming the Hezbollah terrorists, Iran, which is said that they want to wipe Israel off the planet. We certainly don't want them to get nuclear weapons.
Let's shift back to the economy and the point Joel raised about the debt and the deficit. Right now, the Senate is hung up on the idea of taking $30 billion, I believe, that has been repaid from the TARP plan and either using it for a so-called second stimulus through community banks for loans or to pay down the debt. If you're in the Senate now, which do you prefer?
Stimulus. There's no question. I mean, you have 24 million people unemployed and underemployed. That has to be priority number one, priority number two, and priority number three. If we don't put Americans back to work, we're not, how will we ever pay off our deficit? The way we're going to pay our deficit back is by making our economy vibrant again, by stopping our dependence on foreign oil and this huge transfer of wealth to these countries, and by becoming a net exporter again, like we were when I was a kid.
Do you have a quick critique of the $787 billion stimulus, how that was spent?
Well, my understanding is, first of all, is that not all of it was spent. Only a part of it's been spent. So the first critique is, if you pass it, we should have used it, and we should have used it much more aggressively in job creation. Some of the things I mentioned earlier, like that plan I told you about, where I was down at that jobs center, where these people were able to hire, and the government, instead of giving assistance, was able to get people jobs. Those kinds of things. I think tax incentives to small businesses, whether it's payroll tax holidays, we need to do much more laser-focused job creation. If we don't create jobs, we're never going to pay off our deficit.
You mentioned housing and people not being able to afford housing and using your expertise in real estate when you get there to create programs. What specifically would you do? Because you've been critical of the programs that the government's done so far.
Well, the program, the government, I mean the program, the guidance, I was critical of the government failing to regulate the banks who are making loans to individuals without knowing that those had no ability to pay them back. That's why the government wasn't making these loans, but I think I'm critical of politicians taking money from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, like Kendrick Meek did, and then having subprime mortgage seminars and getting people loans that he knew or should have known they couldn't pay back. So, look, I think we have to have. I think the best housing creation in this country is a private-public partnership. You know, government perhaps having loans available to the private sector to build affordable housing for people who need it. It's worked well in the past, and it'll work well in the future.
The Democratic candidate who emerges from this primary is going to be running in a very, very difficult three-way race, and you're sort of the Democratic Party outsider. If you defeat the sort of the party insider, how do you expect to be able to unite the Democratic Party in a way that would allow you to compete effectively with the other two candidates?
Look, I've only been in this race for 7 weeks today. It's 7 weeks to go today, and I'm humbled by the thousands of emails and phone calls I've received from people all over Florida who are embracing my candidacy, who are excited about a job creator, someone who's an outsider, who's not going to take any special interest money, who's going to get out there and finally get results and put the people of Florida first. So I'm absolutely certain that when I get the nomination, the Democratic Party will rally around me, and they'll realize that they're going to have a wonderful voice in Washington to finally get things done for the people of Florida.
We know your criticism of Representative Meek as the career politician and the insider and all that. On some of the issues we've talked about, healthcare, financial regulation, foreign policy, the environment, are there any areas where you and he differ significantly that you know of?
Well, look, I think the main thing is that sure we do. Kendrick Meek, we're as different as night and day. He's someone has been in politics his whole life. He's never really, he's never signed the front of a paycheck. He's only signed the back of a paycheck. I've signed the front of a paycheck since I was in my early 20s. I know what it is to meet a payroll. I know how it is to create jobs. I understand how
right, and we're clear about all that. But in terms of just ultimately in terms of matters in the Senate is how you vote. And at least for a lot of things, because legislation has to get passed. So are you different from him in any way that you know of on major issues?
Well, in many ways. Well, first, look at the housing issue. He was taking money from Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae instead of pushing for loans to be made to people that couldn't afford to pay them back.
Understood.
When I'm there,
But-
I will be, that's a housing. The economy, I know, when it comes to job creation, I'm a
He
job
voted
creator.
he voted for the stimulus. You would have voted for the stimulus. In
Okay.
other words, is there a vote on a big issue he's made that you think was wrong?
You know, I don't want to comment on that because I don't have his voting record in front of me. I can tell you this. I can tell you that in general, when I look at Kendrick Meek, I just know that since he's been in Congress, we've lost 700,000 jobs in Florida. He's not the kind of person who should be our senator. He's involved in a corruption scandal right now. I mean, his mother got an Escalade, a $90,000 consulting fee. His chief of staff got a $13,000 loan to buy a house, and then he went and applied for he applied for an earmark for $4 million for the guy who was providing all those consulting fees and cars and loans. I'm not going to take a penny of special interest money. I'm doing this for the right reasons. I want to go to Washington. I want to work for the people of Florida, and I want to get results. That's what this is about.
Do you have thoughts about ending the war in Afghanistan? Is that something you want to do sooner? Are you willing to wait and see what happens next year, or do you want it over with now, or you want to go in for longer than next year?
Look, Afghanistan's a tough call. I mean, we're not meeting the kind of success that we'd hoped to meet there. I just read the New York Times last week about Karzai meeting with the Taliban, and he may already making arrangements to befriend them. And this is a scary situation because look, we were there for a purpose to isolate and get Al Qaeda and Taliban out of there, and not in control, and it has not been successful. So, I would leave it up to the generals and to the president to make the best decisions, and hopefully either we'll have a successful result or we'll wrap it up and get out of there. But I certainly don't want this to drag on forever.
You say that you do not support Arizona's new immigration law. You favor a different approach in Congress. You, like everybody, want to secure the borders. Would you be okay with an immigration bill that allowed illegal residents here to attain citizenship by meeting certain standards, by doing certain things like learning the language, paying restitution, and all the things that have been mentioned? Would you be okay with that?
Look, the biggest problem we have right now is we have to secure our borders. I mean, to me, as soon as I walk in this building, I'm probably on camera. There's enough camera technology, infrared technology, and manpower that we can secure this 2,000-mile border with Mexico. So we have to secure the border. Then we have to think of a humane way to deal with the 11 or 12 or however many million illegal immigrants who are in this country. I don't have an exact answer on how we should do it, but the first thing is, before we can do anything, we have to close the borders.
You did say you were against amnesty.
Just a blanket amnesty for everybody? Yes, I'm against a blanket amnesty for anybody. I mean, there are people, look at my grandparents, 3 of my 4 grandparents were immigrants. This country is built on immigrants, and you know what? I really believe the greatness of this country is that we have people from so many different countries and so many different walks of life and different backgrounds, and we all come together to form this wonderful United States of America. And so immigration is what this country is built on. So I'm not interested in stopping immigration, but we want the right kinds of immigrants here. Do we want felons here? No. But if people are willing to work hard and pay taxes and become part of our America, we want them here.
Where did your grandparents come from?
Eastern Europe, 2 from Lithuania and 1 from Poland.
I'm a People magazine kind of guy, so I have to ask you, Heidi Fleiss came to live at your house after she was a victim of abuse, you said. Mm-hmm. She called you up and asked if she could come and live there. How did you know her before that?
After she got out of prison, somebody brought her over to my house to a barbecue, a mutual friend, and I met her, and then I saw her around a few times. We had friends in common, a few friends in common when I was living in Los Angeles, and she was telling me about this. She was being beaten up by her boyfriend, and I said, look, I said, if you ever have nowhere to go, because the truth is I was living between 2 homes, and I was traveling an awful lot. I was hardly there, and I said, you can always come stay at my place in a guest house if you have to, if it's an emergency. And I got a call one Saturday night saying he's out of control and he's hitting me, and I said, well, come right now. And she didn't really want to stick around. She said, I said, look, you can stay as long as you like, and it didn't really. But this isn't about who my friends were, and the people of Florida are. No, the only people asking these questions are People like you. The people I'm seeing on the streets, they're asking about jobs. They're talking about the economy. They're talking about the
Well, I
environment.
mean, with Heidi Fleiss, it could be, and with Mr. Tyson too, it could be a character issue. You can understand why people are curious about your relationship with those people, because they've been
Sure.
notorious.
Look, we're in a very celebrity-oriented culture. I understand that. But you know what? The reality is I didn't live my life looking over my shoulder my whole life wondering who are my friends going to be, because who am I going to help out in an emergency, because someday I'm running for office and it won't look good. And let me tell you something. If somebody had any woman was getting beat up today, even if she was not the best person to associate with in the Senate campaign, I wouldn't let her still get beat up. I'd tell her she'd come stay with me. So that's the way I am. I don't live my life trying to.
If you were in the Senate now, would you vote immediately, one way or the other, to repeal the don't ask, don't tell policy of the Pentagon, or would you wait until the Department of Defense report on it comes out later in the year? There's a push to go ahead and repeal the law now. Do you agree with the policy?
I agree that I would repeal it right now. I think it's in America. You know, if somebody's serving our country and going to war in Afghanistan, they don't need to have to live with a don't ask, don't tell law ever again.
There could be, depending on what happens in November, a push in Congress to repeal the health care law based on the idea that the individual mandate is unconstitutional. Do you have any specific thoughts on that legal question about the health care bill?
From what I've read, I think it's constitutional, and I will do everything I can to not repeal the health care law. I will look at it closely. If there are things that can be done that can make it a better law, or if in any way it impacts Floridians' Medicare or Social Security benefits because of the costs, I will make sure that doesn't happen, but I will not support repealing the health care legislation.
You are not the first very wealthy man to decide, maybe I'd like to be in the U.S. Senate. Mark Dayton did it, John Corzine more recently, and the ones who have done it more recently seem to have run out of enthusiasm, because you come from these business backgrounds where everything is very hard charging, fast turning, and you go to the Senate where it just seems lately, at least if you ask the House of Representatives, ideas go to die. Temperamentally, because you'd be a backbencher, how would you get along in the Senate? How would you survive and work in that environment that seems so different from what you've been spending your life doing?
Well, look, I've had a long conversation with John Corzine about this, and John was
He's former chairman of Goldman Sachs, everybody knows.
But I just recently, and the last several months, and I can tell you that he was very frustrated as a senator, because he himself said it could take 24 years till he's chairman of a subcommittee, and he said he was 52 years old when I'm 55 years old. But you know what? The problems in this, to me, I'm in a panic mode about where this country is going, the direction in which it's heading, and I'm not willing any longer to sit up in the bleachers and have these guys on the stage running our lives. And I hope that my getting involved, despite all the little personal stuff that's come up and all the negatives I've had to endure, and to do this, I hope that inspires everyone in America, from all walks of life, to realize that we have to all take ownership of where this country is going. It's not us versus them. It's not them taking care of us. The problem is big. We're in a very important crossroads for our country and our world. And I think whether you're a carpenter, or you're a painter, or you're a professor, or a doctor, or a teacher, or a reporter, or a journalist, everyone has to realize that they have to take charge of the situation. And my feeling is that in the United States Senate, coming there as a Democratic senator from what will hopefully soon be the third largest state, the biggest swing state, I will use that currency to fight and get things done.
That's an interesting point, and we got 5 or 10 minutes to go, so we'll get to our last 2 or 3 things. But you're panicked about the way the country is going. You're running as a Democrat after the Democrats have been in charge of Congress for 3.5 years, and with a Democrat in the White House for the last 1.5 years. Are you indicting your own party when you say that you're panicked about the way the country is going?
Look, the 2 wars are George W. Bush wars. the recession we're in is a George W. Bush recession. I mean, this unemployment rate didn't happen in the last year and a half. So President Obama inherited an economy that was losing 750,000 jobs a month, in which the financial markets barely missed imploding, and we just barely, he was barely missed a depression by the skin of our teeth. So, you know, this is a George W. Bush Republican problem that we are in the early stages of beginning to clean up. And I'm looking forward to joining the president. The president is a brilliant guy who has all the right ideas, for the most part, and I'm looking forward to joining him and getting them solved.
You lived in Israel for some time, and I don't know if you maintained a residence here. I assume you did, but what made you come back, or what happened?
Well, I lived in Israel as a high school exchange student. When I was in Israel, well, no, I mean, I was 16 years old. I got on a scholarship, and I went to Israel. I lived with an Israeli family and went to an Israeli Hebrew-speaking high school. I still speak Hebrew, and I lived there in Ramat Gan for 4 months. And I lived in other areas in an intensive Hebrew study, place where we did intensive Hebrew study in the summer. And it puts me in touch really very closely with the Middle East, because I know every inch of that country during its borders now, when they still had possession of the Sinai Peninsula. I've been to Sharm el-Sheikh, and I've been up to the Golan Heights, and I've been to, you know, every inch of Israel. And I understand what they're facing with these hostile countries on all their borders.
What do you think of the President Obama's, the Obama administration's policies toward Israel? How would you critique this?
I think they've been a little unfair. I think that Israel is our friend. Look, you know, we all have fights with our friends, don't love everything they do, but to me, when you have differences with your friends, you air them behind closed doors. Israel is a great ally of America. Israel will do anything for America, and we need to stand by Israel as our friend. The Middle East is a vital part of the oil from the Middle East is vital to our economy, and Israel is our friend in the Middle East. You know, right now, look what Israel's facing. Iran has now completely rearmed the Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon. They have 4,000 missiles. Many of them now can reach Tel Aviv. The ones in the last attack only made it as far as Haifa. You've got, you know that in Gaza, I mean, they stopped the flotilla. I'm sure that the Hamas in Gaza is loaded up with weapons, ready to just unleash them on Israel any second.
Did Israel warrant any kind of criticism for the way they stopped the flotilla?
I wasn't there, and I can't tell you. But if a humanitarian mission is coming towards a country, and they're wielding clubs and knives and sticks, and they don't have passports, something doesn't seem right. And the other thing about Israel, which we can't forget, is Egypt. President Mubarak, it's probably pretty well known as cancer, and he's been able to, because whatever's going on in Egypt, he's kept the economy going pretty well there, and it's kept the Muslim Brotherhood there in check. He's planning on his son taking over. A lot of people around the world don't think his son's going to be able. I think his name is Gamal. I don't think he's going to be able. A lot of people around the don't think he's going to be able to hold that group, to hold everyone down the way his dad has. If that happens, that's 80 million people on Israel's border, and just because they have peace with each other, everyone knows there's really no real connection between these two countries. The Egyptians are not traveling back and forth to Israel. It's a very, it's a very, very flimsy kind of peace. So, Israel has threats on all of her borders, and I think it's really important that we as Americans understand that that we have to stand by Israel, especially during these difficult times.
We gave Representative Meek a closing statement. You get the same.
Okay, how long is my closing statement? A couple of minutes?
That'd be good.
Okay, you've heard my voice long enough. Okay, well, look, I'll just tell you this. It's great. It's first of all nice to be here at Palm Beach. At Palm Beach Post. I hope that you'll consider supporting me. I have very deep roots here. My younger brother had a paper route for this paper for 3 years. I was telling someone earlier when I was first here working as a busboy, I answered an ad from the Palm Beach Post that got me my first job doing telephone sales. And in Palm Beach, this area is my home. My mother's been here for almost 40 years, and my dad passed away, unfortunately, in 1979 after he struggled. And when my dad first came here, I mentioned earlier, he lost his livelihood in the textile and machinery business. He struggled every day of his life. He had a bending route. And I was 24 years old. I had to come down to his place on 45th Street and sell all of his possessions. And I remember going to his office after the funeral, and because I hadn't been there, and I opened and looked in his desk and saw piles and piles and piles of bills. And he died of a massive heart attack from the stress of having to juggle all the bills and not having any money. And he was a proud man, and he'd lost everything. And seeing my dad struggle like that has put me in touch with people struggling all over the country. And I'm always, every day of my life, I try to be helpful, whether it's family members, friends, philanthropies. And that's one of the reasons I'm running for Senate, that I really feel that people all over Florida are struggling, people all over America are struggling. And I feel like for me, I want to get involved in a very big way and start to address some of these issues. And I really feel that I'm offering a very clear choice to people in Florida between, 3 politicians, all of whom are involved in corruption scandals. They've all been career politicians. They've all failed. And me, a self-made man who has created jobs and will get results for the people of Florida. So I really hope that you'll consider endorsing your local candidate.
Thank you, Mr. Greene. Thank you for coming in.